told us that multiple rescue operations were underway when they first arrived. Again, they have not been able to check all of the buildings there. As you can see, it is unsafe, he said, for some fire crews to get in because there is a building collapse, as you are seeing there with this smoke billowing out of this apartment complex building there. So again, they have not been able to go around and check all of the different units there. He is unsure how many people live here. He is unsure how many units there are. Their job right now as fire and rescue is to get these flames under control. And again, a very unsafe situation as we can see what appears to be a building collapse now. And we've heard from several people on scene there as well who have told us what they're seeing. Again, they saw flames just completely engulf this entire apartment complex in a matter of seconds. So we are hoping for the best, but we have heard that there are multiple casualties and multiple injuries. We also have now Tom Hucker. He's a Montgomery County Council member on the phone. Tom, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm told he will be joining us momentarily. Again, many people in the area starting to gather and kind of watch what's going on. We're going to go to Tom Hucker now. Tom, can you hear me?
I can.
All right, Tom, are you on scene? And if you are, what have you seen this morning?
I just arrived. There's still a lot of smoke coming from the building. I was notified by constituents. I know this, the building and this area very well. It was part of the master plan several years ago. This is apartment full of working people, many immigrants, longtime residents, many seniors, and I don't have any information yet. It's just a horrible shame and tragedy so far, but I can pass on any information when I receive it.
So Tom, you said you are familiar with this building a little bit. Could you tell me about how many people live here? How many units?
There are 2 3-story buildings that are connected. I'd be guessing, but probably 150 units, maybe more.
And what do you guys do in emergencies like this? You talk about a master plan. What is the plan? And I know we're told many people were able to get out on their own, but when you have an apartment fire like this, in terms of exits, emergency exits for people on top floors, what can you tell me about that?
I'd really have to get more information about what was the cause and what was happening. I don't know. Unfortunately, we stopped inspection of a lot of apartments 2 years ago. I was very, very strongly against that decision, but I hope that didn't have anything to do with this. I'll find out more about the cause soon.
So when you say you stopped inspection of many of these apartments, like this one here, you were not sure if there were working smoke detectors, smoke alarms?
I don't know. The county executive suspended apartment inspections a couple of years ago. And so, they're way behind in inspections. I don't know if that had anything to do with this, but I will try to find out more ASAP. That's why I'm saying I don't know much about this apartment in particular yet.
Tell me what you're seeing there. We're seeing, views here from our Sky 9 from above. We're seeing the smoke still billowing out.
Yeah, I'm across the street. There's a lot of people that are shaken up. We're all standing in the middle of a lot of smoke. And there's a lot of our fire and rescue personnel on the scene. Hi, Pat. How are you?
Have you heard any first accounts from people who were able to get out of the building? Maybe anybody you've talked to?
I don't know. I should call you back when I have more information, if that's okay. Or you can call me back.
Okay, no, that's completely fine, Tom. Thank you so much.
Okay.
So you just heard from Tom Hucker. He says he's estimating that it's about 150 units. He's there on the ground now. He said about 50 feet from where this is. And he says he's seeing a lot of people shaken up, people that were able to get out of their homes. He says there's a lot of longtime residents, a lot of elderly people he knows of that live here, many immigrants that also live here. He used the words hard-working people who are living in this apartment building. Again, if you are just joining us, this is an apartment building in Silver Spring, Maryland. We got reports of an explosion at about 10:45 this morning. Many 911 calls and saying that there was an explosion on the first floor And since then, fire crews have been battling this. We've heard from fire crews that many buildings are collapsed. As you can see right there, this is live video from Sky 9. You can see part of this building just completely destroyed. The roof has been collapsed. So again, fire crews also telling us that it is not safe for them to go in yet, as they are still battling the flames and battling the smoke. And there are partial collapse and complete collapses throughout this apartment complex. And now we're going to go to Randy. He is on the phone. He has Creative Cakes. It's a business. She has a Creative Cakes business nearby. Randy, what can you tell us? What are you seeing there this morning?
So I see the smoke, very thick and dark, coming from the building. You can smell it. It's frightening. And there's many emergency vehicles, fire trucks and ambulances and police to block the whole area. It's awful. It's just horrible.
In your voice, how terrified you are, and you're describing it as being horrible. Have you been able to talk to any people that were able to escape?
I don't know anything about the people in the building. I hope to God that there is no one in there.
You're talking about the smell of smoke. About how far away are you, and how far is this smoke extending?
Let's see, how far away? I'm just going to guess a quarter of a mile.
Okay.
I mean, it's a walking distance to where I am.
Yeah. And what do you know about the building? Obviously, your business is nearby. What do you know about this building, about how large is this building? I'm sure many of the people in this building are customers of yours.
Probably. I mean, the business has been around since the 80s. I don't know how old the building is, but yeah, I don't know anything about how many people are in there. I just don't know. And there's fire trucks everywhere.
Have you been living and working here in this area?
There's also a helicopter above. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Oh, no, I was just saying, how long have you been living and working in this community?
I've been working here since 2008.
And have you ever seen anything like this? Again, I can just hear the fear in your voice.
No, we also heard an explosion before the fire.
How loud? Describe to me what you heard and about what time. And you're saying you're about a quarter mile away. So tell me a little bit about that explosion. We're hearing it happen around 10:45.
We heard an explosion, and one of the girls made a comment about, is it an earthquake? So it wasn't that. We didn't know what or where it was coming from. And
when did you realize? Did you go outside immediately?
It was an explosion. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. What was that?
I was just saying, when did you realize what it was?
When I heard the emergency vehicles go by, I opened the door and saw the fire.
Wow. Randy, thank you so much for talking with us. Again, I'm glad you're okay. I know this is absolutely horrific to witness, absolutely terrifying for everyone involved. If you guys are just joining us, we are on the air right now after reports of an explosion at about 10:45 this morning at an apartment complex in Silver Spring, Maryland. And as you can see, this is the result. An entire apartment complex engulfed in flames earlier. It looks like they have most of the flames contained right now, but so much smoke. You just heard from Randy, who has a business nearby. She said she's estimating that smoke is going about a quarter of a mile. And everyone in the nearby area outside watching this unfold. Fire crews told us earlier there are multiple casualties, multiple injuries, and yet they have not been able to safely get into all of the apartment units to check to see if anyone is still inside. As you can see, multiple collapsed buildings, and because of those collapses, these fire crews are unable to safely get inside until this situation is contained. Again, we're hoping for the best here. but we have heard multiple casualties, multiple injuries. We also spoke earlier and with someone else, a longtime resident there, and he told us that there are many immigrants in the building, many elderly people, many people who have lived there for a very long time. He described them as hard-working people. He estimated that about 150 units are here in this apartment complex. So we can only imagine hundreds of people now who are displaced, hundreds of people affected by this.
Charlotte, you look at something like this and you quickly go back to 2016. We had the Flower Branch Apartments complex at that time that suffered significant damage comparable to this. We had 7 deaths in that case, several of them children. While we don't know the circumstances surrounding this specific situation, only hearing that that explosion started at a bottom floor, your mind automatically goes there. And then this speaks to a larger problem. Are the homes that are in this county safe? Because now, since 2016, we have yet another explosion that's happened similar to this, or what we saw back in 2016 happening today. And this raises serious concerns about the safety of homes in Montgomery County.
And we also heard earlier that they have not been doing inspections for the last 2 years, and that is a concern. So when I asked if there were working smoke detectors in the building, they could not give a direct answer because they have not gone to this specific apartment complex in at least 2 years. There have not been inspections. We do not know how safe it was, as you mentioned. But then you're hearing things of an explosion. You know, this isn't a fire that started in just one unit. When you hear an explosion and then you're seeing the result, you do fear the worst. You mentioned in 2016 and that there were 7 deaths. Children died. It happened around 10:45 a.m. I can only hope, because that's in the middle of the day, hopefully maybe people were at work, maybe kids were at school. You know, we can hope for the best, but again, we have heard from fire crews on scene there are multiple casualties. There are multiple injuries. They have not been able to get to the units that were directly affected where they believe that explosion originated to go in there and see what is left. They are still battling this. They said it is a very unsafe situation for our fire crews on scene as well. You are looking live above from Sky 9 because of the collapse there.
We're also hearing from Pete Peringer with Montgomery County Fire and Rescue. He's the public information officer for the department. Also saying again that this is a residential apartment building explosion and fire. He's actually on the ground right now. We actually have our crew on the ground right now that's giving us a live shot of those images, and you see the debris, you see how fire crews are responding, and right now it is about trying to find people that may be injured, unable to get away, trying to secure the scene, trying to make sure it's also safe for firefighters that are on the ground, because they don't know just how safe the situation is, because it may in fact compromise their safety. So these are some of the things that they're having to think about as they're responding to this situation.
And that's what we're seeing there. Now we're going back to a look from Sky 9. And when we heard from fire crews earlier, that's exactly what they said. They said their job right now is to get this contained, to get this fire completely contained so that they are able to go in and hopefully see what is left. They're hopefully going to rescue people if people are trapped. Again, when you hear words of an explosion and a complete roof collapse, which when Sky 9 gets a little closer, you could see directly into the building there. And we talked with officials earlier who told us it's about a 4-story building right there. So when you hear an explosion on the first floor and then you see there's nothing left. It's absolutely horrific, absolutely terrifying. This is a ground look right here, Larry, and you can see how dense and how thick that smoke is for fire crews there on scene.
What's even more interesting is when you think about the debris field, and reports that we're getting right now suggest that it's anywhere from 50 to 70 feet from the heart of the explosion, which gives you an indication about the blast itself. Not that it just caused the collapse and the large fire that we're seeing right now, but it must have been so incredibly powerful that you have debris that's now extending 70 feet from where that explosion took place. Well, that information is going to be important because it's going to help investigators determine what exactly was responsible for causing this explosion that we're seeing and that has resulted in this building collapse and this substantial fire.
And we did hear from an eyewitness earlier who said that he did not smell gas. I think that was a big thing. Is this a gas explosion? That was an initial report that they did not smell gas, but again, we do not know. It is way too early to tell. But you are looking now right there at the scene, and you can just see how thick that smoke is for first responders. And we heard from Randy. She owns Creative Cakes, a business nearby, and she was describing the smoke and that it was tough to breathe. You could hear people coughing behind her when she was talking with us, and you can imagine how far this smoke is reaching. You just hope that when the explosion happened, for anyone living nearby, they were able to get out. But again, you mentioned not only the roof collapse being a huge problem here, but the debris and anyone nearby that could have been, there's trails there. We've seen walking trails, we've seen hiking trails. Anybody nearby, when you hear debris going 50, 70 feet, there could be a lot of injuries here. And again, we do know there are multiple casualties, multiple injuries. Crews still on scene, a very active scene, as they have not been able to get into those direct apartments affected to see if there is anybody inside.
Given the size and the magnitude of the situation now, we expect that Montgomery County Fire and Rescue is going to have to call in more fire engines to help assist with the situation, which may in fact necessitate them calling in crews from around the Washington Metro to help with this, because this situation is significant. And as we have heard about at least the early indications of those that are injured and loss of life, this is a massive effort that's going to require significant manpower. I want to focus on the investigation because that's going to be an important part to this as we shift from a rescue situation to then the investigation itself. Investigators are going to be looking at everything. They're going to be looking at the debris field. They're going to be looking at the things that may have contributed to the explosion itself. They're going to be talking with people in the community about what they heard, what they knew leading up to that explosion.
And we are hearing now that our very own Tom Dempsey is there on the ground at this apartment in Silver Spring, Maryland. Tom, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Charlotte. Just a horrific scene out here. So much smoke in the air as we show you sort of what this scene is like right now. We saw an entire side of this apartment building collapse, and you can see all the debris that is outside of this apartment building right now. This is just a total wreck, this apartment building right now. So much debris, and something that we could, our photographer pointed out, and in regards to those reports of the explosion, I do want to show you around this scene, something you might not be able to see from the helicopter level. You can see things like window blinds on some of the bushes around here. You can see what appear to be clothes or blankets that are on the trees a distance from this apartment building. But again, that kind of backs up those reports that this was an explosion that brought force to all of this. And you can see just how many pieces of this debris that are right near this apartment building and all the water that these fire crews are using right now. If you want to pan down and come over to the right a little bit, you can actually see just all the water that is being used right over here, pouring down the hill at this apartment complex that they are trying to put this fire out. Lots of smoke in the air though right now. Again, we're following all sorts of reports from the investigators about multiple injuries and casualties out here. And when you are out here just seeing this, it almost just takes your breath away, seeing the amount of damage with this apartment building, seeing all the emergency crews out here with the 2-alarm fire. We even saw people who seem to have evacuated from either this apartment building or a nearby one, holding suitcases filled with things, that just showing the immediacy to get out of this area when this all occurred, and just sort of the emergency when this all happened. But again, lots of smoke, white smoke in this area right now, almost coming towards us a little bit. And we're seeing all sorts of debris, and now we can actually see the other side. This is about as close as we could get to this scene before Montgomery County fire crews told us to kind of back away, but we can actually see the other side of this, the front side of the apartment building now too, just gone. I mean, there's no other ways to put this, guys, that this apartment building is destroyed. The roof is gone, the backside is completely collapsed. The floors we can see are collapsed, and now there's lots of emergency crews out here trying to put out these flames. Just such a busy scene right now, and we are again, it's about as close as we can get to this apartment building, but about maybe about a quarter mile in that direction, there's people standing with suitcases, kind of just watching the emergency crews come in here and kind of going through all of this. Very smoky in the air though right now, but again, we can see behind me the blinds from the windows on this bush over here. You can see, again, blankets, clothes that appear to be blown out from the apartment building that were now hanging from the trees. And you can even see a children's bicycle right on the stairs. And what's sad about this, you can see the water that's being used from this fire just pouring past that children's bicycle. But again, a very busy scene out here, guys. Montgomery County Fire and Rescue, a 2-alarm fire. You can see the crew members walking around the scene at this moment. But again, when you are out here and seeing some of this damage, this building's completely destroyed, guys, and this is going to be a lot of cleanup, a big rescue effort. You're just hoping and praying that if there's anybody in there that maybe they can just hold on through all of this. But again, we're following reports of multiple injuries and multiple casualties through all of this, guys. Still a very busy scene out here.
And Tom, I think the one thing that is chilling for all of us, when you point out the clothes that are strung across the bushes, the blankets, seeing that child's bicycle, I believe I saw a pink bicycle helmet in the debris. It's absolutely horrific. It's tragic. And we are hearing, as you said, multiple casualties, multiple injuries. And you just pray that someone would have survived this.
Tom, another question before we let you go. Have you been able to talk with anyone nearby, those that live in the area, business owners, whomever? What have they told you about what they heard and what is going on right now?
Honestly, we were in such a rush to get, bring our viewers this view of it all, but we could see, Larry, people talking on the phones with family members, you could almost just see the shock on their face watching this all unfold as emergency crews were out here. And again, we were in such a rush to get out here, I wasn't able to directly talk with anybody who may be living around here, but you could almost just see it on their faces, just that shock and that fear of seeing what unfolded here. Again, the reports of an explosion and then a big fire, as we can see, and all sorts of destruction. And very important to note, you're seeing the destruction here at this building right here, but there's a lot of apartment buildings in this general vicinity. We can see a lot of them almost just looking straight ahead right now. And so you have to think of all the evacuations that had to occur as a result of this, the quick leaving from the dwellings around here to make sure people could get to safety. And again, following these reports, you can just imagine the terror that these people felt. And I think that's kind of what we saw in their faces when we were arriving. I saw one woman when I pulled up here frantically trying to park, and she quickly got out of her car and was sprinting towards this living complex, this apartment complex. And you have to think, when they're seeing these reports come in and seeing all these damage, maybe not able to get in touch with a loved one, and just seeing all this destruction, what might be going through their head in regards to all this. But Larry, again, to answer your question originally, just a lot of shock in regards to what we're seeing out here and a lot of fear amongst the people. And we're going to try and get some more of that reaction and perspective from the people who live around here.
Yeah, no doubt we share with those, we have those same sentiments as we watch the images as you have pointed out to us. Seeing the back of that building completely gone certainly gives the indication that folks were trying to get to safety as desperately as they possibly could. We talked about the fact that this is going to be a large rescue effort, and now on Twitter we're hearing from DC Fire and EMS saying that they too are sending out crews to help battle this fire, to help support the firefighters that we have from Montgomery County that are there as well. In addition to that, we have Pete Peringer, the Public Information Officer from Montgomery County Fire and EMS. He is on the ground right now giving us his perspective of the fight to get this situation under control. Let's take a listen.
This is Pete Peringer with Montgomery County, Maryland Fire and Rescue. I'm out here on the scene on Lyttonsville Road in Silver Spring, where around 10:30 we were called for a fire and explosion. Garden-style apartment. They arrived on the scene. They did have heavy fire showing from several floors. There was an explosion. Obviously, a building collapse. You can see here there are injuries. I don't have the exact count, but some of the injuries are serious. And there were a number of rescues that were made by firefighters who arrived on the scene. Again, this is on 2400 block of Lyttonsville Road in the Silver Spring area, on the hills. And firefighters are obviously currently on the scene. Multiple alarm fire, at least 2 or 3 alarms worth of personnel and equipment, a number of EMS units. Again, as I said, there are injuries. I will have an update on that here shortly. You can see it's pretty heavy structural damage. There was a collapse. There's a danger of this wall collapsing here that you're looking at. Of course, it's basically freestanding. Fire is basically contained, but again, you can see there was a pretty significant explosion and fire.
And you just heard from Pete Peringer from Montgomery County. He was on scene there describing this horrific scene. If you are just now joining us, we are breaking into your regularly scheduled programming. You are looking at an apartment fire in Silver Spring, Maryland, with reports of an explosion. We have multiple casualties, multiple injuries. You saw Pete on the ground there in his video and how horrific it was. We heard from our Tom Dempsey, seeing clothes strewn about, bicycles, bicycle helmets, people's belongings, 50 feet from the explosion. And again, multiple rescues underway, but crews, as you can see, are still trying to contain this fire, this building collapse that resulted from an explosion there at this apartment complex in Silver Spring.
Our reporters rushed to the scene as soon as we got word of that situation. We spoke with one witness who described what they heard as that explosion took place. Take a listen.
I mean, I went jogging and I live right, next door right here, and I heard a loud explosion. My mom called me, asked me what's going on. I didn't know what was going on, but I saw the blazing and the building across the fence where I was. So I jumped the fence and went over there, and I saw people lying on the ground with burned like skin, melting off. And so I took out my phone, started taping it, calling the 911, running the building, knocking on doors, and trying to get everybody out. There was an old lady in there that was, so the fire truck came and they, took her down the ladder and all that, but,
So what building was it and how many people you think were in the building?
Oh man, a lot. As far as older folks within the building, there was a lady who was crying out for her son who did not make it out, and a gentleman who, you got my mama coming right now, there was a gentleman who was working in the apartment that got, it's like an explosion from the building. Fire, or we call it like a gas tank or something, because the guy was in there working. He said that's where the explosion started. So he jumped out the window and the other lady run out behind him, and that's where the whole thing started from.
Wow. So it was a big explosion that you heard,
man.
And it was a lot of people in the building.
Jerked the whole floor.
The whole floor.
Yeah, cause I live like not even right across the street, and my building, explode. Yeah, that's my mom right here. She heard the explosion and called me, so she ran out, and I told her to get out of the house, and then she coming over,
So you just heard that man talking. He lives across the street from this. You're looking now at a viewer video from the ground when the flames were just completely engulfing this apartment complex in Silver Spring, Maryland. We are told that there was a huge explosion, a massive explosion, which caused this fire there. You heard that man just describing that there are many older folks, elderly folks, as he said, that live here. He saw one man jump out of a window, women running out of their apartment complex. You're seeing this, we're seeing this for the first time together. This is absolutely.
And that clearly is a woman in shock right there. So given what we know about this explosion, it's clear that this was sudden, that this was aggressive, that this was catastrophic in the damage it was able to cause. And I keep going back to that Flower Branch apartment complex explosion that we saw in 2016 that was very similar to what we're seeing right now. A sudden explosion in an apartment building, multiple casualties. This is going to raise serious concerns about apartment safety in the county.
Right.
Given the fact that we've had now 2 major catastrophic events happening within a short period of time from one another.
It's absolutely horrific. We just saw that video from a viewer who sent that in to us. He was there moments after that explosion happened, moments after that fire occurred. I don't know if we can go back to that video, but it's so tragic to know that these people were in their homes going about their day, and then an explosion rocked this entire apartment complex. We are told that there are hundreds of people who live there, possibly 150 units. All of those affected, again, by just the smoke. We've been seeing the smoke extending for at least a quarter of a mile. And you can see here the fire. This was right when it happened, about 10:45 this morning. It's going to pan over this woman, clearly in shock. This is absolutely devastating. I cannot imagine what she is going through.
Actually, I think it's important that we not show that woman in shock right now, because clearly she's suffering, and we should not be seeing anything like that. And certainly your heart goes out to her.
We wanted to just show you those flames to see how the massive size of that. But these people, described as many elderly people, one person described them as hard-working people, a great community of people who live in that apartment complex. Again, one guy who was across the street, he said his apartment complex was rocked by that explosion. He felt that. Many people thinking it was an earthquake at first because they did not know what that could possibly be. And now we're learning an explosion of some kind. We do not know if it's a gas explosion. We do not know what caused this explosion. It might be days before we learn the cause. But right now, this is the focus: containing this fire, containing this collapse, and being able to get in there and see if there are any survivors.
Laura, one of the big issues that's already kind of coming to light is the safety of that building. We want to bring in Laura Geller right now, one of our investigative reporters here at WSA 9. Laura, what can you tell us about the building itself? I understand that you've been combing through safety records, and it might give us an indication and a history about this building.
Hey, Larry and Charla. So, when something like this happens, we dig into the records to see if there was anything that could help in a situation like this and help us understand exactly what we're seeing in terms of such damage. And as we know, over the pandemic, a lot of records, a lot of inspections weren't done because the inspectors couldn't get into places for safety reasons, and there weren't a lot of people working. But we are looking at the records for Montgomery County right now, and it looks like the fire inspections were actually just done literally 1 month ago on February 3rd, according to Montgomery County records. The renewal for the fire code compliance, the renewal for the fire alarm system, and the renewal for the wet sprinkler system were all passed by an inspector for Montgomery County. Now, if you go back a little bit in these records, the 2020 inspection was actually waived, and we're assuming, but we have to confirm with Montgomery County, that that might have been because of the pandemic and difficulty getting into some of these places. But the most recent inspection, which again, guys, was done a month from today, said that it passed the fire code compliance, the fire alarm system, and the wet sprinkler system. So that might explain a little bit of what we're seeing in terms of possibly not as much damage in some of the neighboring units in this, but that's yet to be seen. I did call the person who is listed as the inspector for this building, and he spoke to me very briefly, but pointed me to the PIO for Montgomery County Fire and Rescue, who, of course, we've spoken to. I asked for a little bit more information, but he said he would have to get back to me, and actually hung up. So we are going to keep digging into these records. But again, the usual problem that we've seen, that many of these inspections were not done or were waived during the pandemic, they are catching up, and inspectors did pass this facility as it looked for its renewal for the fire code inspection, the alarm system, and the sprinkler just last month. Guys?
Laura, kind of speaking to that specifically, those inspections would deal with whether or not the building was compliant regarding county regulations for fire alarms and sprinkler systems. Does it speak to an underlying issue that we clearly can't see right now, that something else may have been going on with the building that could have triggered something like this?
We don't know that yet. Right now, we are only looking into the fire code compliance permits. We haven't yet looked into any structural permits or any inspections that were done because of possible problems. This is just as to whether or not the building complied with the fire code. So that usually has to do with how many smoke detectors there are, if the sprinkler system is working, if the alarm will sound when a fire happens. Things like that. So we are going to dig a little deeper and see if there are any building code inspections that might have been done or not done, and any possible complaints that might have been addressed. But this specifically has to do with fire code compliance.
Right. Laura Geller providing us an update on the building's safety. Laura, thank you so much. We appreciate that.
All right, we also have Delia Gonsalves. She is live there on the ground for us. She's just arrived on scene. As we can see from
Stand by.
Sky 9, the smoke billowing around, and now we go to Delia. Delia, what are you seeing there? Have you had a chance to speak with anybody there?
I parked about 4 blocks away, just arrived to the area, and it is a massive scene of crews, of family members, folks in tears. I saw a woman who was looking for her elderly mother, 65 years old. She hasn't heard from her mom and hasn't seen her mother. However, we're told by Pete Peringer, who is the PIO, the Public Information Officer for Montgomery County Fire, that 5 people suffered critical injuries. They've been sent to the hospital. Everyone, however, has been accounted for. We do know there were people trapped inside the building at the time of the collapse. Those folks have been evacuated. Everyone, we're told by Pete Peringer, has been accounted for. And you can see crews now dousing water on that structure that is just now a pile of rubble. We approached and saw heavy flames, lots of smoke in the air. In fact, many of us are wearing our masks because the smoke is so intense in this particular area, just gusting in our direction. So for our own safety, everyone is wearing a mask, becoming overcome with these, with the smoke, and you can only imagine what it's like for the fire crews who are inside as well. A short time ago, I spoke to a man, TJ Hall. He was in tears as his grandmother was being escorted off of a bus. There are buses nearby serving as shelters for folks who have been evacuated. He was in tears as his grandmother was seemingly safe, but obviously you can imagine he was so afraid for her safety. She was being brought onto a stretcher and wheeled out to a medic and an ambulance, and they would eventually take her to the hospital. He says that he was told there was some kind of explosion. He was actually inside with his grandmother and said, "Did you hear that?" And she said and she also said prior to that explosion, I should say, that she smelled gas. The explosion happened, he said, and then they got out as quickly as possible. However, he broke down saying many of his friends were inside the building when that structure collapsed, and he has not heard from them since. You can imagine it is a chaotic scene with folks trying to find their loved ones. However, I can reassure folks, anyone who's watching and people out there, that we're told by the PIO, the Public Information Officer with the fire department, that everyone has been accounted for. We are still trying to figure out just how many people were inside this building, the general ages of the folks. That one woman I told you, the 65-year-old whose daughter is looking for her desperately, she just moved into this building. And as we heard from prior reporting, Laura Geller talking about investigating what may have happened, looking into the history of this particular building. But I'm just gonna step out and really just take a look at this intense scene. This stretches for at least 4 to 5 blocks here on Lyttonsville Road in Silver Spring. We have fire trucks from all over the area. I see a fire truck from Fort Detrick who is here as well, offering aid to the crews. I saw lots of crews just trying to gather themselves, come up with a plan of attack, and go back into the building area to try to figure out what happens next in this investigation. Obviously, the number one priority is to get these folks to safety. They have these shuttle buses here housing folks who have been evacuated. They have removed the critical patients who are now at the hospital getting treated. But you can see there is still a lot of work to be done to not only make this situation in this area safe to be in, but of course to get to the bottom of exactly what happened this morning. Still a lot of unanswered questions, a lot of panic by residents who said again they smelled some kind of gas this morning, and then that was followed by an explosion, and of course intense bright orange flames and smoke that filled the sky. You can see the plume of smoke just billowing into the sky at least 5 or 6 blocks away. Again, I told you, I parked about 4 blocks away. They were not allowing cars to get any closer to this building, obviously for safety reasons. And as you're approaching, you just see fire hoses strewed all across the road and apparatus everywhere as crews are trying to put out this fire and try to gain some kind of normalcy. Obviously, it's going to be a very long time for folks who live here, whose lives have been destroyed in the matter of an instant this morning. But we can report that everyone has been accounted for. There is no cause for what happened, but everyone has been accounted for. 5 people are critical. About 10, we're told, went to the hospital. The others who don't have critical injuries, they suffered smoke inhalation as well, including TJ Hall's elderly grandmother who was being wheeled away when I spoke to him. So certainly some very tense moments. We're going to remain here on the scene, trying to figure out exactly what happened here and giving you a continued look at the very difficult work that's being done to try to regain some kind of safety here in this area. Larry, back to you.
Do we know if there's been any sort of staging area organized now for those that may have been displaced as a result of this explosion? Is the Red Cross there? Is anyone there to help these folks?
You know, I haven't seen the Red Cross. I just arrived to the scene, as I told you. Haven't seen the Red Cross. However, there are a number of shuttle buses nearby. I would say about a good distance away from the building. They're in a safe proximity from the building. Shuttle buses that are housing people at this point. Medical crews who are attending to those who need attention. And I can only imagine that the Red Cross, if I have not seen them personally, are either here or will arrive very shortly. We know it is critical to try to get to these folks immediately. A lot of folks are probably working off adrenaline, so they may actually be in need and not even know it at the very immediate moment when they get out of this situation. I think we have some sound from some of the folks that we talked to. I'm going to toss to that and let's listen to what that says.
My grandma died, I see her later, but when I opened the door, that's my grandma right there. When I opened the door, I said, Goonie, do you smell that? It smelled like gas. And she said, I know, I'm going to call somebody. So I left. I went ahead and left. When I got, about an hour ago, I got a phone call saying that the whole building blew up and the building collapsed and there's multiple people that's still in there. And then I rushed over here, but I got here, but they finally got my grandma out. They got her out on the ladder truck.
What's going through your mind when you did
I was scared. I was scared. I still got friends that's stuck in the building right now. The whole building collapsed and came down. But I was scared for my grandma. I was worried. And I rushed over here as fast as I could to make sure my grandma was okay.
What's your name?
Well, my name is TJ Hall.
That is just heartbreaking as you hear the range of emotions as he so clearly could describe what he smelled, what he heard, the moments of the explosion, and then the sheer panic, worried about his grandmother, even though he could physically see her, still worried about her. And then, of course, the unknown, his friends that he hasn't spoken to. Again, I should emphasize that Pete Pieringer with Montgomery County Fire tells us that everyone has been accounted for, which really is a miracle in this situation. After a massive explosion and this building collapsing, and now you can see it is simply just a pile of rubble. To imagine that anyone got out of that alive, that is the takeaway, and that is the one bright light in a very dark day for so many people. The sun is shining, it is a beautiful day, but right here in a very concentrated area, it is the worst day of their lives. Back to you.
Thank you so much for putting that together for us. Certainly an indication of what those people are dealing with right now. You see the emotion. We saw that video of that woman in shock. When you have something that sudden, that aggressive, that dangerous happen, your mind goes to a bad place. But the fact, as we heard from Delia, who was on the ground telling us that Pete Pieringer telling her that everyone's been accounted for, those that are injured have been taken to the hospital, you can breathe a little bit easier right now.
And for those just joining us, she is at the Friendly Garden Apartments that is in Silver Spring, Maryland. And this is video from Sky 9. You are seeing what is left of this apartment complex. Reports of an explosion at about 10:45 this morning. We've heard that there are about 150 units in that apartment building. So that's hundreds of people. And it truly is, to use Delia's words, a miracle that everyone is accounted for. She has been told that there are 5 in critical condition. They have been transported to area hospitals. But again, everyone accounted for. But you could just hear the fear, the horror that these people are going through. That young man was talking about his grandmother and concern for her. And we have heard from other people, neighbors nearby, that have said a lot of elderly people live in this apartment complex. One person described all of the people in this apartment complex as hard-working people, good people, and just a horrific day for all of these people here. It's Friendly Garden Apartment Complex in Silver Spring, Maryland.
When we look at the scene itself, you see police on the ground as well as firefighters that are trying to get some sort of order. Right. Because one, as we just learned from Delia, they have to go through the scene trying to account for everyone that they believe was inside at the time of the explosion, and then make sure those that were injured are taken to safety and given medical treatment, and try to find those that they cannot account for. The good news, as we just heard from Delia moments ago, that everyone has been accounted for. 5 people now in the hospital with critical conditions. When we heard from one young man that Delia interviewed, he said that he smelled gas before he left. And I want to zero in on that because that's an important thing to consider. Because when we had this same situation happen back in 2016 at the Flower Branch apartment complex, when in that case we had at least 7 people die, some of them children, it was the same kind of characteristics. A large, aggressive, sudden explosion that caused the collapse of an apartment building that resulted, at least in the case of Flower Branch Apartments in 2016, several being killed. In this case, we haven't heard of anyone passing away because of those injuries, but it raises the question because in the case in 2016, people said the same thing. They smelled gasoline before the explosion. And of course, we don't have the official information just yet. That will take days and weeks. And of course, the gas company will have to get involved to investigate whether or not there may have been any sort of factors that could have contributed to this incident on their end. And of course, firefighters will be looking at that as well. But you have to at least look at it and consider it, given the similarities in what we're seeing today and what we saw back in 2016.
And we do have our Tom Dempsey. He is on the ground. He has been on scene now for a better of a half an hour. And Tom, what have you seen? Have you been able to talk to anybody there?
Well, Charlotte, what's interesting is when you're this close to this this scene, and you can actually see some interesting details in regards to all this. Our photographer and I were chatting out here. You can see the top of this tree here. What's interesting about this is it's the proximity to the apartment building, and it could offer some details of just how big this explosion was. You can see the top half of the tree is actually missing some leaves, while the bottom half looks to be, in full bloom here. And again, you can see just how close this tree is to this apartment building. And again, if you can imagine this explosion possibly leading to this fire and this explosion, possibly burning off some of those leaves. And another thing we kind of want to walk you through, kind of giving us maybe a scope of this destruction and just maybe how much of this apartment building collapsed. If you look through some of this smoke, you can actually see maybe the unit next door. You can actually see about half of this apartment building is missing through all of this. Again, giving us a scope of this destruction and kind of giving some perspective on all this debris we're seeing. And again, you can see some of the floors that collapsed in regards to all of this. But if we pan over to the right, this may offer some reference. You can see again, all the destruction here, but this building right to the right, you can see just maybe what it might look like normally, this apartment building. And again, kind of offering some context as to what we're seeing out here and just how many floors were impacted through all this and just how much space was impacted through all this fire. Again, this continues to be a very busy scene as we've seen through Sky 9 and here on the ground. Still lots of smoke up in the air. We are seeing some residents come over here a little bit more kind of beyond where the camera is. One gentleman on the phone saying he's been on the phone with his daughter throughout the morning trying to get details as to what happened. She got out safely, which is very good to hear. And again, we say very good to hear, especially when you're this close and you just see just how terrible this was. I mean, just a scene of horror out here when you're seeing pieces of this apartment building scattered about the lawn here. And again, we've noted this during our last live report, but you can see things like window blinds blown out from this apartment building and now strewn up on this bush here. You can see a little bit off in the distance from there what appear to be either blankets or clothing that are stuck on the trees here. Again, giving us scope of just the force of this explosion and again, just how this happened out of nowhere and just how this happened inside of people's homes. Again, offering some context of just how dangerous this was, how terrible this was. And again, where we're seeing some of that, the tree possibly impacted by this explosion, leaves burned off the tree potentially as a result of all this. And then you see the unit next door kind of giving us context that around half of this unit looks to have been collapsed, as well as the other units below that collapsed as a result of all this. But we can report County Executive Mark Elrich is out here at the scene. I'm looking at him as we speak, and he appears to be speaking to maybe a head investigator of the emergency crews out here. So still a very busy scene, as you can imagine here. Still lots of work ahead of for the emergency crews as they kind of go through all this rubble, guys.
Tom Dempsey, thank you so much. Again, you are looking live at the scene of an explosion there at an apartment complex at Friendly Garden Apartments. That's in Silver Spring, Maryland. An explosion after just about 10:45 this morning. This is Sky 9 of what is left of that apartment building right there. You can see just completely devastated on the right side of that building. And now Ardelia Gonsalves is live on the scene.
Right. She's talking with Pete Peringer, the Public Information Officer for Montgomery County Fire and Rescue. Delia?
We spoke to Pete just a short time ago. He's actually stepping away just to make a phone call. We can tell you that at 12:30, the county executive, as well as the fire chief, will brief us in regards to exactly what is happening. However, Pete Peringer has remained steadfast with what he first reported. Everyone is accounted for. 5 people critical. 10 to 12 have been transported to the hospital. Some people refused transport. However, they have treated those individuals. We know the Red Cross is on the scene. There are buses serving as shelters for those who have been displaced. We don't know exactly how many people were in the building. However, Pete Peringer does say that when they were accounting for everyone, trying to rescue folks, that's when they discovered people were being pulled out of the rubble. Now, that is their number one priority when they come to a scene like this. And I'm told that almost instantaneously when crews arrived and the fire just filled the sky, that building collapsed. We're talking 4 stories. Obviously, this is a concrete and brick structure. 4 stories just pancaking down. I don't know where, and we don't know at this point where and what floor those critical residents were at the time of the collapse, but we can tell you, remarkably, everyone has been accounted for and they're out of the building. When you take a look at what is now left, it is just destruction. And I haven't seen a scene like this in quite some time. And Pete, we were just talking about the sheer panic of all the residents who are here trying to account for everyone. I spoke to a woman who said she's looking for her 65-year-old mother, but you can assure us that everyone has been accounted for.
I cannot assure that, but I believe that we did have people that were initially unaccounted for. We did make some rescues. Obviously, there was a catastrophic failure of the building, or collapse, and heavy fire conditions. So our primary objective whenever we have incidents like this is our life safety. We have transported 5 people to the hospital. So it's likely that person may be at the hospital. We evaluated a number of others. Some people refused transport. Others were taken less serious injuries. But so this is all still developing. Again, there's nothing left of the building. So again, we do have to go through, cross the T's, dot the I's, make sure that everybody is accounted for. That is being accomplished now. Several of the other buildings have been evacuated. We have shelters here. Of course, the leasing office is very helpful. Red Cross is here and so forth. But we still have a lot of work to do as far as the fire and explosion. And the chief and county executive will be out here shortly to give you the latest information.
Yeah, and these kind of situations, everyone wants answers, right? Everyone believes they may have smelled smoke or they may have smelled gas, and they are kind of coming to conclusions. But certainly something like this, it's going to take a very long time to figure out exactly what happened here.
Yeah, the first responders did report that there was obviously an explosion of some sort, probably an explosion and then a fire. So again, the root cause of that is unknown. I've not heard anything about anybody smelling gas as far as the first responders are concerned. I haven't had an opportunity to talk to area residents, but again, nothing has been ruled out at this point. We still have a lot of work to do. We have lots of resources here, of course, over 100 firefighters and EMS crews, but our primary objective was life safety.
I was going to ask you about that. This is an incredible scene. I mean, 4 or 5 blocks away, you have crews everywhere strategizing on how to attack the situation here. DC Fire is here as support. Tell me about the support and the crews that are here.
Yeah, so of course we have fire. This is Silver Spring, not far from downtown, so we have lots of resources in this area, but what we call battalion in this district. So we were able to get here very quickly. In fact, Walter Reed or Fort Detrick is nearby. They were first to arrive. They reported heavy fire conditions. We were able to bring in additional resources, mass casualty, technical rescue or collapse rescue folks initially. So we have all that expertise and all those resources are here. I don't believe that DC's on the scene, but they obviously are filling some of our stations nearby, as I'm sure Prince George's and others are probably doing as well. So we always appreciate that mutual aid assistance. But at this point, we did have over 100 firefighters here. A number of people, again, have been transported. We have plenty of resources. This building actually has pretty good access to it from both sides, all sides really. So we're able to get water there, ladders there, all the resources in. And they made pretty quick work of it as far as rescuing people. And again, our primary objective is life safety.
And it's a miracle that we believe everyone is out of this building. Last question, only because we've done this before. We have been on many scenes for years now, talking to each other and getting a sense of trying to bring a sense of calm in what is a very hectic, chaotic, and horrible situation for a lot of folks. In your opinion, in your long career, coming to a situation like this, is it still a gut punch when you see the smoke, the families crying? I mean, how do you deal?
Well, sure. I mean, it has a huge impact on our community. So certainly, our primary objective in fire rescue throughout the nation and the world, for that matter, is life safety. So that's our primary objective. So we don't like to see anybody get injured or accidents that are preventable occur in the first place. So we work very hard to prevent the 911 call. So when you have an incident like this that is catastrophic, we hope for the best, that no one's hurt, or if someone is hurt, we're going to give them the best possible treatment, get them to the best possible care as soon as possible. So as far as I know, that's been accomplished here. So then we'll take it from there to make sure, get this community back on their feet, make sure that everybody, obviously has a huge impact on all of us, but no one more than the people that live here.
Yeah. No firefighters hurt?
Not that I know of.
All right, Pete, I appreciate you. Thank you so much, Pete. Pete Peringer, who has been on the ground for several hours at this point, trying to bring calm and information to a very chaotic and really horrific scene for a lot of folks. Like he said, the people who live here, this is the worst day of their lives, even if you know that your loved one is safe and accounted for. Just the what ifs, right? What if someone is still in there? What if it went a different way? We saw some amazing, heartbreaking video that my photographer, Dion Wiggins, who arrived here on the scene well before I did, of just the house, the building engulfed in bright orange flames. A woman coming out and just in sheer panic and shock. Almost, she was shaking. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Her clothes were tattered, covered in mud. She was wet, and she was being cared for by someone who just was maybe a resident, maybe a neighbor walking by, but she was in pure shock, shaking and just looking at the building in complete awe. Probably just couldn't believe what she was seeing. In an instant, your whole life is just pancaked and is rubble. Here's the good news. Pete Peringer can say that everyone that they were looking for has been accounted for. The folks are at the hospital who need care. The people who need shelter are receiving that. The Red Cross is here trying to support these families. Yet we also know that this is going to last, and the support of these families will have to last well beyond this one day. It will last for months to come. And unfortunately, because, and Larry, I know you talked about the other horrible fire and gas explosion that we covered several years back, we know that it takes the community to come together and support these families so they can get back on their feet. But certainly some good news in what is a horrific day for a lot of folks. One last look at what firefighters here are doing. We have crews from all over the area. We also heard that DC Fire and Prince George's County firefighters are manning the fire stations as the crews from Montgomery County Fire are here trying to battle this blaze and get the situation under control. They will be dousing these hot spots for some time in hopes that we don't rekindle anything. And certainly, as Pete said, all of the buildings nearby have been evacuated as well. No one else hurt in these other buildings, but for their safety, they have been evacuated as well. And remarkably, no firefighters have been injured. So everyone is rallying together, crews are working hard, and we will remain here on the scene to try to give you all the updated information. And of course, when the fire chief and the county executive arrive at 12:30, we will bring that to you live.
Delia, thank you so much. Remarkable similarities compared to what we're seeing today to that situation back in 2016. Delia and I both covered that story back in 2016. It looks remarkably the same compared to what we're seeing today. And the stories that we're hearing from people, at least from one man who said that he smelled gasoline prior to the explosion. But Delia touched on an important point, that the community's coming together. The Red Cross is on scene. People are getting the help and assistance that they need. Everyone has been accounted for. 5 critically injured in the hospital receiving medical care right now.
We're going to go now. Tom Hucker is back on the phone. Tom, I spoke with you about an hour ago. He's a Montgomery County Council member. Tom, thanks for joining us again. What have you learned as this scene has been unfolding?
Sure. Well, we haven't learned very much yet. We have a great response from our fire and rescue and our Department of Emergency Management. We have so many great, both professional and volunteer emergency first responders that are on the scene doing great work. But it's just a horrible tragedy, and we don't know the scope of it yet. The building's largely gone. It reminds me a lot of the scene at Flower Branch 5 years ago. And, this is a really important community. It's really resilient, full of very hardworking people, lots of immigrants and seniors and just working families. And, coming through a pandemic and a recession, obviously this is just the last thing anyone needs, and we don't know the scope of the tragedy yet, but hopefully we will soon.
Yeah, Tom,
there's a lot of emergency services being brought in from Red Cross and Interfaith Works and many of our nonprofit partners to make sure that people have the emergency food relief and the housing and any other services that they need. Certainly grief counseling and other things if that's necessary.
Tom, we've heard from people who ran to the scene because, as you mentioned, there are many elderly people who live there. We had several people telling us, they were terrified for their grandparents who live there. And again, it truly is a miracle that everyone is accounted for. We believe so, and only 5 in critical condition. What goes through your mind when you see the people that are coming out and they're looking for their loved ones in just, I guess, sheer horror?
It's your heart just jumps out of your chest and compassion for them and concern. We saw so many of the same scenes 5 years ago at Flower Branch, and that we'll do a whole after action report of and I'm sure there'll be a long investigation of this one as well. But we really need to do everything we can to keep all our apartment residents, all our tenants, as safe as possible. There's 300,000 tenants in Montgomery County. People don't realize that. It's almost a third of the entire population, more than a fourth. And there's a lot more, I think that could be done to ensure their safety. We don't know anything about the cause of this yet, but every day they're exposed to, even annoyances and health hazards like mold and mice and other things that I think the county needs to continue to address. We've been working very hard on that the last few years. But this is, it's just a horrible tragedy. I don't know what else there is to say until we know more.
Well, Tom, quick question before we let you go. When is the county council going to meet to discuss this issue and potentially look at whether or not there might be some other problems in other apartment buildings throughout Montgomery County?
I'm sure nothing's been scheduled yet. We have to take things, in stages. We have to, let the investigation here proceed and assess the cause and determine the cause. And once we know the cause, there's all kinds of things we could meet and speculate about, but we want to make sure we know exactly what caused this so we can take the most appropriate action.
All right, Tom Hucker.
We meet throughout the week, and we're going to be staying on very much on top of this.
All right, Tom, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's a very, very tough day for the entire community here in Montgomery County and in Silver Spring, Maryland. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
I do want to get to one tweet from Governor Larry Hogan, whom we're hearing from right now, saying this, that our team has been in contact with Montgomery County officials and Maryland State Fire Marshal, Maryland Department of Emergency Management, Maryland State Police have offered their full assistance in response to this fire and explosion in Silver Spring. Please keep all of those involved, including our first responders, in your prayers. Again, the good news in all of this, that everyone has been accounted for. 5 critically injured receiving medical care right now. Another thing that we want to point out, looks like we're getting some information from Pepco. We understand, at least from our assignment editors, that Pepco crews will stand by to disconnect electric service if needed as a safety measure regarding this situation. And for emergency responders at the scene. Of course, they say they would like to refer to Montgomery County Fire and Rescue for any additional information on this incident. We reached out to them to see exactly how they were responding to the situation as well, but it looks like they too are aware and are acting in tandem with Montgomery County Fire and Rescue.
And we've been hearing from a lot of people on this scene. For those of you just joining us, let's recap just a little bit about what's been going on and what's been unfolding in the last hour and a half or so. At about 10:45 this morning, there were reports of an explosion at the Friendly Garden Apartments in Silver Spring, Maryland. And you can see this is the result right here. You can see this is the end of the apartment complex right there. We're told it's 4 stories. Several hundred people living there, all, as Larry just mentioned, are accounted for. And we are going to hear now from a witness who was there when all of this unfolded.
What did you hear? What did you see?
I was sleeping at home because I was working last night. So all of a sudden when my daughter woke me up, the building was on fire, everything crumbled. So we were unable to get out, but fortunately, finally we get out.
How did you get out? If it was
just people helped me to get out with my daughter.
Did firefighters help you out?
Yes.
What floor were you on, sir?
3rd floor.
The third floor?
Yes.
So you woke up to flames in your apartment?
Yes. Everything damaged.
How are you feeling to be here, to be alive?
Trust, I have nothing in my hand. You can see me. Yeah.
But you got your life.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
What's your name, sir?
Mebratu.
Can you spell that for me?
Mebratu.
Okay, and last name, please.
All right. Absolutely horrific. You heard him right there. He was on the third floor of this apartment complex. We're told there are 4 floors in this apartment complex. And he woke up to flames and firefighters pulling him out. The good news, no firefighters were hurt in all of these rescues today. 5 critical, of course, we've heard. And everyone has been accounted for, which, as you see there, with the collapse, with the building completely destroyed, with an explosion of that magnitude, it is truly a miracle, to use Delia's words, who she is witnessing it firsthand on the ground, that everyone is accounted for in a situation like this.
That's certainly the upside to all of this. Now the investigation takes a bit of a shift. So as they work to make sure that this scene is secure as it possibly can be, the next steps will be trying to determine what exactly caused this explosion and whether or not there might be any other underlying issues in that vicinity. It's going to look very similar to what we saw with the Flower Branch Apartments complex explosion back in 2016. We will see kind of a consistent movement in this investigation as well, expecting that news conference to come up at 12:30, where we're going to hear from Montgomery County Executive Mark Elrich. Interestingly enough, Mark Elrich was at a news conference and a meeting yesterday with the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, where those two were talking about the need for additional housing, affordable housing in the county. And now to have this issue the 24 hours after that meeting, where we have this massive explosion and people that are injured, raises serious concerns about what is going on. And as we heard from Tom Hucker, the Montgomery County Council has to meet to look at this and to see whether or not, based on what we saw in 2016 and what we're seeing today, if there are any underlying issues that may pose a threat to the safety of residents in Montgomery County.
And you know, we're looking now at a spot where our Tom Dempsey has been all morning long. And so we've seen some of his reporting and you just see rubble. We're looking now at what's left of this apartment building. And I think what really hits you is when you see the bikes, the children's bike helmets, you see the clothes just hanging in the trees and hanging in nearby bushes. And you see people's blinds, curtains. You realize these are people's livelihoods. This is their home. Everything they have, as that man said, he has nothing left. He was on the 3rd floor, woken up in the middle of the night by firefighters, and he has nothing, just the clothes on his back.
Surrounded by flames in his room.
Absolutely horrific. We are so thankful that there are no firefighters who were hurt. We are so thankful that everyone is accounted for. 5, though, are in critical condition. And I think, you know, it just hits you when you see all the children's clothes, the children's bikes. We just hope that none of those are children. It happened about 10:45 a.m. So our hope is that children would be in school at that time. But that man said he worked overnight shift. So 10:45 was the middle of the night for him. He was sleeping at that time. So these people, as Delia said, this is the worst day of their lives. And many people now going to see if their grandparents were affected, if their family members are okay. Sheer panic going on there now, but we can see the flames have been doused. It looks like smoke still remains, but they're starting to get this under control.
Thankfully, there's been a tremendous response from around the Washington Metro. We know DC Fire also providing assistance as well. I want to go back to a point that Delia raised a short time ago, because she talked about how special this community is. And when we have seen unfortunate events like this, how we rally, how we support, how we make sure people get the things that they need. The fact of the matter is that in addition to those that are now fighting for their lives, that we have dozens of other people that now don't have a home, a shelter, belongings, that really just have the basic things that they were able to get out with safely, are all of the possessions that they have. And already the Red Cross is on the scene providing assistance. People are being able to locate loved ones that may have lived in that apartment as well. And so you see how we step up and show out when we have situations like this, and providing people support that they will need, not just today, but for weeks to come.
And now we want to hear from a man who lived just across the street. He heard the explosion happen and he has been there all morning.
I mean, I went jogging and I live right, next door right here, and I heard a loud explosion. My mom called me, asked me what's going on. I didn't know what was going on, but I saw the blazing and the building across the fence where I was. So I jumped the fence and went over there, and I saw people lying on the ground, burned like skin, melting off. Man, took out my phone, start taping it, calling the 911, running the building, knocking on doors, and trying to get everybody out. There was an old lady in there that was, so the fire truck came and they, took her.
We have catastrophic damage, explosion. The cause has not yet been determined, but again, the chief and the county executive will give you the latest information. Red Cross, Health and Human Services, Emergency Management are all here, coordinating, taking care of the residents. Of course, a number of people have been displaced or will be displaced. So, county executive and fire chief will be with you momentarily. Any questions before we get started with that?
All right, so again, we are getting live updates here about the explosion that occurred at Friendly Garden apartment complex in Silver Spring, Maryland. That explosion happening about 10:45 a.m. The good news in all of this, we are told that everyone has been accounted for. You've seen scenes of the rubble. You've seen what is left of this apartment complex. It truly is a miracle. Everyone has been accounted for, but 5 are in critical condition being treated at area hospitals right now. No firefighters were hurt in this, and now finally families are being reunited. Let's take a listen here.
Looks like we still don't have sound from that news conference. As soon as we get it, we'll be sure to bring that to you live. But we're expecting to get information regarding this explosion, trying to get a timeline of what investigators knew, when did they know it, and what they believe may be those contributing factors to that explosion that we saw a little after 10:45 this morning. You just was looking at Pete Perringer right there. We expect that not only he, but also Montgomery County County Executive Mark Elridge will be speaking this afternoon, again, to give us updates on what the response will be moving forward. We heard from Tom Hucker, a council member for Montgomery County and its council, saying that the county council will be charged with looking into this situation once they get information about what the investigators say contributed to this explosion. But what we know from this situation today and what we saw at Flower Branch Apartments in Silver Spring back in 2016, that these two are very similar in terms of its presentation, similar in terms of what people say they smelled before that explosion took place.
Yeah, and you're seeing what's left of these apartment complex right now. This is from our Sky 9. You just see rubble. There really is nothing left of those units. We're told it's 4 stories high. Again, we heard from one man who was on the 3rd floor of his apartment. He was sleeping when the explosion happened. He was pulled out of his apartment. He described just a wall of flames. He only has the clothes that he is wearing, his pajamas. That's all he has left.
So many of them, that's all they have at this
So many of them.
point.
And as we've talked about, the community is going to now need to rally around these people. The Red Cross is on scene there. We're told buses are serving as shelters at this moment so families can be reunited. We saw a grandson and he was looking for his grandmother. He was able to locate her. But again, many people rushing to that scene, seeing if their loved ones are okay, because we do know that 5 are in critical. They did transport 10 to 15, we're told, to area hospitals, not as critical injuries. But again, there are buses on scene serving as shelters. The Red Cross is there, and these people are going to need a lot of help moving forward, especially those living in those units we're seeing that Sky 9 is showing us, and really a lot of the units that will have smoke damage as well. We saw Delia earlier, and she had to have a mask on. She could barely breathe.
Right.
Because that smoke was so thick all morning long, and that explosion, going back to that, We heard from area businesses. We heard from neighbors in nearby apartments. They thought it was an earthquake because it rocked where they were living and where they were at that moment.
Yeah, and that again speaks to the magnitude and the strength of that explosion. That if you are within a certain vicinity of that explosion, that you would have felt that. And that gives you an indication of just how strong it was. I want to get to some video now that was posted on social media, kind of giving us yet another perspective. And that right there is the immediate aftermath of that explosion. You see the flames rushing through the roof of that apartment building. And as we heard from one man, he said that he woke up surrounded by flames. Thankfully, he was able to get out. Everyone's been accounted for. 5 people currently in critical condition. And it has been an overwhelming response from fire crews throughout the Washington Metro. DC Fire has been there. Other crews in Maryland are also participating as well. Governor Hogan saying in a tweet moments ago that the state resources are behind this effort. Want to get to that news conference that's underway right now. I believe we should be hearing from the county executive as well as other officials that are investigating this explosion. Let's listen in.
This way, that would be very helpful for everybody. They won't have to crawl. Thank you. A little more, a little more, a little more. That's good. Name and spelling. Scott Goldstein. Goldstein, Fire Chief, Montgomery County Fire Rescue. Right about 10:30 this morning, we received 911 calls for an explosion here on Lyttonsville Road. Crews arrived to find a 4-story garden apartment building with significant fire throughout 4 levels of the building and evidence of the explosion. Crews immediately went to work on the fire as well as beginning to locate and remove occupants from the building. Fire crews did assist at least several people from inside this building before the building became completely consumed by fire and the building further collapsed. At the same time, crews were addressing a wide range of injured parties on scene. The initial number at this time is that we have transported 10 people to local hospitals, several of which had serious injuries. The others had assorted and minor injuries. This complex is consisting of multiple buildings. There have been evacuations from all of the buildings adjacent to 2401 because there is initial structural damage from those buildings and there may be significant structural damage inside those buildings. As you see behind me, the building still remains with deep-seated fire pockets and crews are still working to address that. As well, in the last 30+ minutes, we have been working what is identified as a secondary search, searching all of the adjacent buildings again to ensure that there is nobody in any of the buildings that was not located during the first search activities. As Pete identified earlier, there's about 60 pieces of fire rescue apparatus here from across the region in assistance. That's about 120 to 150 personnel from the county support network. All of the agencies of county government are here, as well as our non-governmental partners in assisting these personnel. On site with us is our utility companies, Pepco and Washington Gas, to assist in safety mitigation efforts as well as steps towards determining what can and when it can be reoccupied. For those that may remember Arliss Street explosion, there are similar concerns to structural stability that we had at Arliss Street, and we have our technical rescue resources here, our building engineer resources here, as well as our departmental hazmat resources here to deal with the concerns of any leaking or the components within the building. It is too early for me to say what initiated this. We are working through a wide range of concerns and possibilities. Our focus is on life safety at this time, treating those that were injured
working on accountability for any and all that were in the building or reportedly in the building at the time of the event. I'm going to stop and work my way from my left around to the county executive if he has something to add before any questions start up.
So this is obviously a really tragic event here. It's kind of scary looking at the extent of the explosion, and it's hard not to imagine that the impact that it's had on people. So my sympathy goes out to all the families that have been affected and all the relatives of people that may have been here. This is definitely a tough day. As the chief said, once the fire is done with and the building's safe to go in, they'll begin an assessment of what happened there to try to understand what caused this building obviously to explode and burn. They don't know right now, and we're not going to speculate on it, but that'll happen once it's safe to go inside the building. They can look at what remains of the structure and start beginning to, put together the pieces of what made this happen. Obviously it happened pretty quickly, and it burned really, really rapidly. So I'm just thankful that the other buildings weren't as severely affected by this. This fire actually got contained within that one set of buildings. So it's a tragedy. Unfortunate that it's not a bigger tragedy, and we'll do everything we can to get to the bottom of it and ultimately decide whether there's something we need to do as a county, as a regulatory body, to prevent it from happening. This is, when we had the regulator issue at Long Branch, that was something we tangibly knew that we had to fix the regulator issue. If it's not a regulator issue and it's something else, we have to assess whether it's within something we can regulate or was this strictly human error. But when we know that, you all will know just like we do. Thank you.
County Executive, when you walked the scene, we saw you very close to the scene. What went through your mind? And talk about the long-term effects and support from the community.
It was kind of horrifying. I mean, when you look at a building and see it gutted with the walls down and all the debris piled up, all I could think of is what happened to the people. Hopefully they're at work. If they were home, you got to ask yourself, what happened to them? It was depressing. There's no other way to put it. It's just flat out depressing. And I really do feel for the people who know folks who are here. And even for the folks who lost their belongings and everything else, even if they didn't lose their lives. This is a big setback. These are affordable housing units. These aren't people who've got the wherewithal to pick up and just say, hey, I'll go on with my life. This is going to be a real serious impact. The county's going to have a responsibility to help make sure, A, that everybody's sheltered, and we can help people recover and return to some semblance of normal when this is finally fixed. It was tough.
How long do you anticipate the support from the county?
As long as necessary. I mean, they just can't pick up and go and find another place. We know there's an absolute shortage of affordable housing to start with, so there's not another place you can just pop these people into. So we're going to support them as long as it takes with whatever resources that it takes to do it.
Are all the families affected? Are they all on the buses? I saw some go onto these local buses here.
So some of the folks are on the ride-on buses for shelter. Some of the folks are standing around the bus or over at the community center. That is our next focus, is to, now that all the injured have been transported, is to work on identifying through Health and Human Services and Red Cross, who's here assisting us on identification of those, figuring out their needs, and then working on getting them into a temporary shelter or temporary facilities.
Chief, looking at that, how on earth did anyone get out of there? I mean, did they get out before it collapsed? I can't fathom.
As I said, Brad, fire rescue resources assisted people out of the building once we arrived. So indeed, that is a great opportunity and a great rescue made and a miracle of activity. The others may have exited on their own prior to our arrival, and those may be the people that we have transported. We are still much to learn from how those got hurt, where they were, or those that were nearby, how they got out of the building.
So it might not have been an instant collapse to what we see now.
Possibly.
Chief, I know you mentioned that it's too early to say what might have caused this, but can you just say anything about, did this originate in one specific home, outside the home? What can you say?
It is unsure where it originated at. Based upon the building itself, it's too early to speculate what apartment what part of the building that may have started at.
Chief, you had a question.
We do not have a good number of how many people are unaccounted for. That information is our next priority to identify the accountability for those that were here. Let's talk about displaced. There is roughly 13 or 14 apartments per building based upon the configuration as management has told us. In a normal activity, we use about 3 people per apartment as a round and usually low number. So from that point, I'm at about 35 to 40 people per building. There's going to be multiple buildings displaced in the short term, multiple buildings displaced in the long term. When we get back with you later, we'll give you a better information on that set of information. But again, about 13 to 14 units per building and multiple buildings displaced for tonight and the near future.
Chief, you mentioned this reminds you a lot of the Flower Branch apartments. What have you learned from that investigation, and how will that guide your investigation here?
Every question is important. Every witness statement is important. Every opportunity to determine an episode and a sequence of events is important. And use all of that to build together. We have called and a broad number of our federal partners that assisted us at Arliss Street are either on the scene or coming to assist us here as well.
Have crews responded to this building at all for anything in the past? We're hearing a lot of residents talking about gas smell earlier today.
Unsure about that at this time, but we'll look into that.
Chief, what are you feeling?
Do you expect everyone to survive? Can you talk more about their conditions?
Too early to talk about the conditions and the circumstances of their injuries. Like I said, several were serious and transported. The other remaining were assortment, including down to minor injuries.
Is it clear you were able to do a thorough check of the building?
So I will get to Brad in a second, since I asked you to hold on a second. Yes, we searched as much of the building as was searchable and or survivable space at the time before the building started to further collapse. So we did that, but we will continue to do that, and until we are fires extinguished, until the building is delayered and the rubble is worked through, or until everybody is accounted for, we will not consider everybody to be out of the building. Brad.
Chief, you know, Mr. Elrich talked about it's a depressing sight. You're an experienced firefighter. We've all seen explosions in the past. It's at first blush, it seems no fatalities at this point. I mean, what are you? It's remarkable to us. What are you feeling, looking at this?
I'm feeling hope is what I'm feeling. That is the information, Brad, that we can continue to work with and to continue to communicate. We will work with all of the occupants, building management, and their families to do identification so we can say everybody was accounted for. We'll provide you that update as we go.
Can we tell that the building had a similar heating system to the Long Branch?
Don't know information about the mechanical configuration at this time.
Chief, of the people taken to the hospital, can you say how many are children or?
I cannot say the age, gender, or distribution on those. Did not have that information.
We were talking to a gentleman.
2 more questions, guys. Like I said, there was about 60 pieces of apparatus here, so between 120 and 150, as many as we need to make sure this situation is safe and to focus on these residents' needs.
There was a gentleman who said that he helped rescue people. Did you have several people jump into action during this fire to help?
I have not heard that yet, but we'll figure it out. Last question, guys and gals.
Maybe you addressed this, but can you give us a rough number of unaccounted for people? Do you have unaccounted for?
Don't have that information yet. We'll be back. Some of us will be back here at 3 o'clock for a combined update from the agencies involved at 3 o'clock, same location, okay? Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, so we've been listening to a news conference with officials from Montgomery County giving us the latest information regarding that explosion in Silver Spring. Remarkable that they early on were able to pinpoint that there are striking similarities between what we are seeing today and what we saw at the Flower Branch Apartments complex explosion back in 2016. Because this situation is developing, things that we said earlier are being updated. We're getting fresh and new information. Let's start with what we know. Again, officials telling us that they got a call at around 10:30 for 911 reports of an explosion. Again, 4 stories. You can see significant damage to that building as a result of that explosion as well. And they also saw evidence of the explosion. Several people were assisted getting out of that building. We understand that happened before more fire, and then eventually the building collapsed. At this point, this was the update. 10 people now transported to local hospitals with varying degrees of injuries. And we expect officials to give us an update at 3 o'clock this afternoon on where we stand with the men and women that have been transported to the hospital.
And we should mention that all buildings there have been evacuated nearby. There is a secondary search going on right now. Again, they believe that they got everyone out of the building, but then, now they're doing a secondary search. And Delia Gonsalves is live for us now. She has been there all morning. Delia, what are you seeing?
Well, you're hearing the county executive say that this was simply depressing. We saw him about 10 or 15 minutes before the news conference surveying the scene very close, just really by himself, looking and surveying the damage. And he says it was heartbreaking, depressing. And when you look inside and you see the debris and the floors piled up on each other, you wonder where were folks? What happened to everyone? Were folks inside? Were folks at work? We do know, and as Larry had mentioned, this is a developing story, so some of the information has changed. They cannot guarantee that everyone is accounted for. They are doing a secondary search of the building, but everyone so far that they were looking for, we know that they have gathered everyone. Those who were injured, 5 critically injured, are at the hospital. 10 to 12 are also seeking treatment, but they're not as bad off. When I say bad off, goodness gracious, I mean your whole life has been destroyed. These are affordable housing units. And so you heard the county executive say these folks simply can't just pick up and move on. Life after a fire is life changing. It will take several months to get these families back on their feet. And the fire chief gave us a very rough estimate of how many people are probably living here. I think he said 35 or so. They are working diligently to continue to douse hotspots that the fire chief said are still very active. So this will be an active scene for some time. They don't want the embers to reignite, and that's why they've evacuated people from the nearby buildings as well. No one nearby has been hurt. Thankfully, 150 firefighters who are here, they have not been hurt as well. We know buses are here to serve as shelters, and the Red Cross is here as well. We will find out what you can do to help. We know so many of you at home are watching this scene unfold, and your hearts are breaking much like our own. When I first got to the scene, I've covered in my dozen years here at Channel 9, have covered numerous of these scenes, and it never gets any easier. And you smell the smoke, you become physically overcome and then emotionally overcome. Our job is to tell you the news, to get you the accurate information, but we're people first. And I have to say, when I talked to TJ Hall, when he was in tears as he watched his grandmother being wheeled away after she had escaped this situation, and he cried, not knowing the whereabouts of his friends who live in the building, we embraced. We are all neighbors here, whether you live in DC, whether you live in Virginia, whether you're here in Montgomery County, we are all neighbors. And so it's going to take an effort by all of us to get these people back on their feet. Again, affordable housing units, not everyone can just pick up and move on. And as Dion Wiggins, our photographer who was here earlier today, getting really dramatic video of those intense orange flames just shooting out into the sky, and a woman who had just escaped that devastation, soaked, her clothes tattered, covered in mud, and she was just shaking, staring at the scene, not believing her eyes. It is a miracle that we're not talking about casualties right now. But as we said, crews are here on the scene conducting a secondary search, and they will continue to douse the area for potential hotspots. Back to you.
Thank you so much. And it's important to note that Mark Elridge said earlier they're going to try to understand what caused this building to explode in the days to come. But right now the focus is on life safety. And as Delia mentioned, making sure that everyone is accounted for.
All right. With that, we will do the best that we can to make a bit of a shift to get you an update on the forecast. Mary Marshall standing by right now with a look at how things are shaping up outside. Mary?
To the fire, the flames and the smoke was so intense that you could see it pop up on radar. Now, I did a little bit of adjusting, but you can see this green coming from Silver Spring, moving its way into D.C. That was actually the smoke from the fire. Winds from the north were pushing it down toward the D.C. area. So the radar, while it typically picks up precipitation like rain and snow, can also pick up those small particles of smoke that are moving through the atmosphere as well. It's going to send out a signal, then let us know back what it's seeing. So this is what we saw